Welcome to a very special episode of Talking Devs, the podcast where we talk about the show Devs on FX on Hulu. And this episode, we're going to be doing a mailbag. So we're going to have some listener voicemails, and we also have some emails that we get sent in from our fans and listeners. So we really appreciate that. And today we'll be covering content from the show from episodes 1 through 6. So spoiler alert on that. And as always, I'll be having Jimmy joining me. How are you doing, Jimmy?
Doing good. Glad to be back. How are you?
Doing well. Yeah, no, I'm excited for this episode. Just a little different from the last episode where we did more of an instant take approach, which was also new for us, where we hopped on right after the episode finished, since it airs 9 p.m. Pacific time on Wednesday. So we, with our special guest Micah, we appreciate him joining us. We chatted just an instant take on last week's show, and now we're gonna cover some viewer voicemails. I think the first one we're gonna do, I think spoke to very similar to how we felt about the episode. But I don't know, James, you want to give a little context and kick off the first voicemail we've got?
Yeah, I think initially when we hopped on the pod right after watching the show, our initial thoughts were they kind of lean more on the negative side. But I think with a few extra days to reflect, my opinion at least has changed. I think this voicemail kind of reflects a lot of our more updated opinions on the episode.
Yep, no,
So
totally agree. And yeah, let's hear it, and we'll kind of dive in after that.
yeah, so our first voicemail comes from, he didn't leave a name, but I believe he's from the 660. So someone from Missouri. This is what he had to say.
Hey, I was impatient with the determinism discussion also, and I'm sure there's a lot of us who have explored these questions who found it stultifying to sit through. But I also tried to temper that by realizing that there are going to be some people watching that, maybe a lot of people watching it, who have literally never thought about any of this before, and they probably needed to have that spelled out. Like, everything happens for a reason, not the spiritual version of that, but the literal deterministic reason for it. So I'm okay with having some training wheels on there if that's the price that we have to pay for having some science fiction that explores some deep philosophical issues. But I do still wonder, what if she doesn't cross her arms? What if Lily refuses to go to the DEVS facility? How does knowing about this stuff in advance affect the deterministic tram lines? Anyway, enjoy the podcast. Take it easy.
I think he raises a lot of good points. I think up to episode 6, the show hinted at a lot of stuff, but it didn't really reveal anything. So for people like him and you and I, who are like, after an episode, we're on Reddit, we're looking up theories, we're trying to research as much as we can about this. Like, we already at this point have like convinced ourselves of a lot of things. So when episode 6 comes along, we're like, okay, well, I've heard that. But I think to the common viewer, that episode did shed a light on a lot of things that DEVS was doing up to that point, which I think was very illuminating for a lot of viewers.
Yep, no, I 100% agree. I think like I was coming out of that episode being someone, like you say, looking things up, like Googling the von Neumann Wigner and the Copenhagen interpretations, doing research for the show. And it was helpful to take a step back. I thought this was a good voicemail, and I had some similar thoughts kind of after we recorded the last episode. And, again, not everyone was kind of doing as much research. And so I definitely see how that scene could add a lot of value for folks who are kind of more casual viewers, as I am for most all other shows. And I think the caller left a really good point about, hey, like, even if it is repetitive for some people who are following more closely or have done research, at least it's great that they're making sure that everyone can kind of understand a little better what's going on, so that we can have more, sci-fi or whatever you want to call this genre that kind of tackles these deeper questions versus more just surface level stuff. So I couldn't agree more with that voicemail. Appreciate him calling in and leaving that message. And it did kind of click with how I felt after we recorded the podcast, in terms of like, okay, like I can see how we were a little disappointed because we It felt like we knew some of the stuff going in, and it felt a bit rehashed, but totally understand why they did it. I think I was, had been hoping for more kind of twists and turns, but definitely see the reason they did it, and glad that they did. Give me a new perspective on the episode.
I think it also grounds the narrative a little bit more, because I think up to this point, there had been so many theories thrown out in terms of, are we talking about time travel? Are we talking about bringing someone back to life? But if we want to take Katie for her word, or for her explanation to Lily, like literally this is just being able to simulate the past and simulate the future. There's not a lot. I mean, she didn't mention anything about time travel or jumping universes or anything of that nature. So I think from the narrative perspective, I think this show kind of just wanted to kind of get everyone back on like a common ground.
Yep. No, totally agree. I think that's totally why they did it. So I think it's good they did.
But while we're talking about episode 6, I did want to bring up a few kind of just odds and ends. Nothing too significant, but some points that I wrote down in my initial notes that we didn't really get to talk about in our last pod. First one being, did you notice the name of the company that Jamie said he worked for?
Dude, I had that down in my notes. So it was David Wallace, right?
Yeah.
Which sounded so familiar for me, and I had to Google it, and then I was like, I know this is where I thought it was from. You want to say where it's from, since it's in your since you brought it up?
I know it's a character from The Office, but I don't remember his exact role in The Office.
So he was the CFO of Dunder Mifflin, the one kind of, he had glasses on, like kind of middle-aged white guy, kind of very serious guy who was helping decide the fate in terms of which branches got closed. So if you look him up, you'll definitely recognize him. But it was weird how much, that's so funny. We didn't even get to talk about that in the last episode because there was so much stuff we were chatting on. But I had that in my notes too. That's really funny. I don't know.
Plus, what an odd name for a tech company, right? Like
the name of a guy. Like, that's not really done these days.
Right? It's not like it was a law firm or anything that Jamie was working for, right?
That was odd. I would be curious to know if there's something there.
I don't think there's anything more to that, but it's just kind of funny because when he said it, I was just like, wait a minute, it kind of took me out of the show for a little bit.
I paused it and Googled it.
All right, number 2 of the odds and ends. So when Forrest and Jamie are playing Frisbee, Jamie mentioned something about Frisbee where Forrest responded, "What, you haven't seen the Olympics?" Essentially suggesting that in that world, Frisbee is an Olympic sport. Which last I checked, Frisbee is not an Olympic sport. I know there was talks of ultimate Frisbee being, I think, in maybe the Paris Olympics that are coming up, but I don't think that got approved. So something was a little odd there. I don't think it means anything in the grander scheme of things, but just something I noticed.
Yeah, it looks like it has been recognized by the IOC. Obviously it's not an official competition in the Olympics. Also, I guess we haven't, I don't know what year it is. Like I'm trying to think if there have been any things. There's probably some terminology, TV terminology for something that kind of denotes to you what year it is, but I haven't seen anything that would say it's 2020 or 2025 or anything.
Yeah. I mean, the world has looked similar to our world, right? We haven't seen any like futuristic looking cars, or, they're using iPhones.
Yeah, that's true.
Their encryption or their cryptography
Cryptography
techniques are pretty ancient, as evidenced by Lily trying to just randomly brute force guess Russian passwords. So
that's true.
We are somewhere, I think, in our current timeline.
Yeah. No, but that's a good point. Yeah, maybe this is supposed to be a different world then. It'd be interesting.
Yeah. And then the last odds and ends I have or had was, this is more a generic question, but why has all the focus been so far on just Forrest's daughter? Like, why have we not talked about his wife at all? Because I mean, she was in the car crash as well. I mean, granted, I don't think we have confirmation that she died in that car crash. But why is Forrest so obsessed with his daughter, and why has the wife not been mentioned whatsoever?
Interesting. I've wondered that too. I guess a few things would be, one thing would be like, as the symbol for the company, I feel like having a young kid taken out of her life taken at such a young age maybe provides like a more inspiring symbol potentially. But then kind of outside of that kind of corporate angle, personal, like in a personal relationship side, like maybe there's stuff about the relationship we don't know, that Forrest and his wife had. Maybe the relationship wasn't as great, although in those flashback scenes, scene seems to be fine. And then also, with the whole relationship he has with Katie now, that puts it in kind of a weirder place, I think, right? Whereas if he were still like single and longing for his wife and missing her, now it's a little different that he's in this new in-like relationship with Katie.
Yeah. I just thought it was odd that the wife is just not mentioned at all.
I totally, I could see something coming up maybe in the next 2 episodes to at least address that, but also potentially not. But I think it's a really good question. I'm not sure.
All right. Well, that was all my odds and ends. Thanks to Micah for that segment.
Cool. Then I think we had some more questions to handle.
Yeah, we had a voicemail from loyal listener Matt. He had a few questions, just more generic about the show in general and its storylines. I broke it down into 4 different segments, so we'll just tackle each one by one. Here's the first one.
Hey guys, my name is Matt. Love the podcast and love the show DEVS. So I have a few questions, and they're about just the show overall. Okay, so with Amaya and Forrest, is that the guy's name? So we assume he wants to go back in time and be with his real life, alive daughter who's died. So does he want to go back in time? Does he want to bring her back to live with him in the present? Just kind of like, what is his practical goal there? Because he seems very intent on actually making it happen. It's not just theoretical.
Yeah. So this is definitely one of the overarching questions of the show. I think it's a really good one. So my personal take on it is that at least the show seems to be framing things around almost how Forrest is more concerned with potentially proving that it's not his fault, or that we live in this deterministic world where he kind of didn't have the choice to make that phone call that led to the distraction and his wife and daughter being killed. Obviously, I think with the beginning of this last episode where they show the flashback of him playing with his wife and his daughter, that seems to also present the motive of he wants to go back to this life where he was happy and around his loving family. But to me, at least, like, it seems like at least the show's presenting it that he cares more about solving this question of whether it was really, quote, his fault, or if he had anything to do with it. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think for Forrest, it's pretty binary. He just wants to know if he's innocent or guilty in Amaya's death, right?
Yep.
I think they said it best in episode 5. They're trying to prove if determinism is true, and if it is, then Forrest is innocent. If determinism is false, then that means Forrest could have had a choice in affecting the result or the outcome of that crash. So if determinism is false, he's guilty. I think that's pretty much it for Forrest at this point. I don't think there's anything beyond that in terms of like he wants to bring her back to life or anything. He's just trying to absolve this guilt he's had for the past X number of years that Amaya's been dead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. That I agree with that. And for Matt's question, like, yeah, I'm sure there is some aspect of it where he maybe wants to kind of be with his daughter. Although, remember the scene in, maybe that was like episode 3 or 4, where even if she has a few hairs on her head different from the Amaya that he knew, it wouldn't be his actual Amaya. So,
yeah. Well, here's my question. Yep. Let's say he does want to, quote unquote, be with his daughter. What does that mean in this world? Because in my opinion, they don't have the ability to bring anyone to life. They don't have the ability to time travel. They only have the ability to have a projection of someone. So at least I guess if I'm going to answer my own question, him being with his daughter just means that he has a 100% real replication of his daughter in this projection, and him being with her is just, watching her from the DEVS facility. I don't know if you have a different opinion, but that is how I
Yeah.
interpret Forrest being with Amaya.
Yeah, I think I agree. The one thing that keeps coming up to me is the multiple scenes now of them bringing this mouse like kind of quote back to life. It doesn't seem to, I can't tell if it's the mouse in their actual universe or if it's in their simulation or their projection that the mouse is coming back to life. But could Forrest be in a world where he's able to at least interact with what maybe it's not his actual daughter or someone brought back to life, but in some sort of simulation where he can interact with Amaya in that regard? Like, does he lock himself away in the simulation, in this simulated world with her and maybe his wife too? Like, I could see him doing that potentially, right?
But do you think they could somehow transfer his consciousness into this simulation? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, maybe they could. I was thinking more like you create the simulation of, or they have this mouse that they quote bring back to life, or that's in a simulation. So maybe he can, like, could they have some simulation of his daughter in a world where wasn't in the car crash, and maybe he can't actually like connect with her or interact with her, but he could see how her life potentially played out. I don't know. Like, I could see him just locking himself up, and that's all he kind of cares about, and becoming a recluse. And
Yeah. Well, going back to what you said about the rat, right? They did show the rat coming to life, whether that's them actually resurrecting the rat or them resurrecting the rat in a simulated universe. So I guess question one for me is, can you replicate someone who's alive? Like, can you replicate Forrest in the same world where you're replicating Amaya? And if not, would Forrest have to die in this real world for them to be able to replicate him in the simulation that they're replicating Amaya? So in that sense, they are now together.
I see. Interesting. Yeah,
Or
that's
am I
possible.
just overthinking it?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of possibilities, like stuff still unanswered. So
Yeah. I mean, I know 10 minutes ago I just said there's no resurrecting anyone,
yeah, it looks
but
like you.
that's what this show does to me.
Yeah, it totally does. Okay, cool. Well, good part one of Matt's question. You want to queue up the next one?
All right, here it is.
Okay, so with Sergey, why did they have to kill him if they already knew ahead of time that he was a Russian spy? Couldn't they have just handed him over to the CIA? I mean, he still would have had a terrible fate either way, and then DEVS doesn't have to be murderers. It just didn't seem like, obviously DEVS are super smart people, so it just didn't seem to match. But I can also understand the argument of that they're so crazy focused that there's no middle ground, that they'll kill you.
Cool. I can take part of this. So
Right.
in terms of why they didn't kind of hand him over to the CIA, my take is that they want to keep this as secretive as possible. In episode, I think 3, where you had the senator come and visit, and they wanted to, I think, keep the government their hands off of this as much as possible. So I don't think you want to open yourself up to, hey, why would the Russians feel the need to send a spy over here to the CIA? Then the CIA wants to start poking around, and once they find out what's going on here, like that's pretty scary to imagine. What's already scary to have some tech billionaire with this technology, but then what the government could potentially do with it too is also pretty mind-blowing and scary. So that's my take on that. And in terms of the why did they have to kill him, I think this overlaps a bit and is a good question with like Sydney's question from last week. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier about Forrest wanting to prove his innocence. So I think prior to killing Sergey, they already looked into the future and they saw that these are the sequence of events that have to happen. And so Forrest, who wants to believe that determinism is true no matter what, is too afraid of veering from what they already saw. Like, if they don't kill Sergey, that then prove determinism is false, and that means Forrest is guilty. So I think they already looked into the future. They saw this is what has to happen, and they do not even want to risk veering from that projection, because at any moment, if they veer off from it, then that essentially proves all of Forrest's theories wrong.
Yep. No, totally. Couldn't agree more. And I think we'll get into this next question, but also we have the setup from the last episode where 21 hours from now, also would like to call out that that's a Fibonacci sequence number, which I'd forgotten to call out in the last episode.
What number in the sequence is it?
Oh gosh, 7, maybe.
I don't know.
Oh, okay,
but I'm going to take your word for it.
Look at that. What is it? 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. Oh shit! 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, and then I'm going to stop. But all right, each episode I'll try and add one more number onto the list.
Good thing we only have 2 episodes left.
But yeah, so I think this leads into what, again, I think Matt will talk about next. But in terms of Lily and this 21-hour deadline, where we're going to see where basically the static happens on the projection, and she's supposed to go into the DEVS facility. But yeah,
do you have any new theories about the static?
I don't know. Like, clearly it's some sort of weird inflection point, and apparently, I guess they can't look past that given the projection. So I'm wondering if it's like maybe there's going to be some tough choice Lily has to make, and it hasn't been decided yet, or the projection doesn't know what she's going to do. Like, I feel like it could be she has to save Jamie or shut down DEVS or something. It's going to be some sort of tough existential choice that she's going to have to make, and the projection isn't able to figure out what she's going to do. That's my take.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of theories online about how people keep saying, oh, it's like the machine being broken or something like crashes. But in my opinion, the machine does not need to be present during the time that it's trying to project, right? I mean, if it doesn't exist past point A, it should still be able to project something happening past that point.
Yeah.
But I did read this theory that I kind of liked. So I'm gonna try to see if I remember what exactly said. But basically, it was hypothesizing that what we're watching right now is Lily watching a simulation of herself. And when she arrives at DEVS, she is now watching DEVS trying to run an additional simulation, which suddenly the computational power needed to do that overpowers the system, and it essentially reboots the initial simulation. You get what I'm trying to say?
I think so. Yeah, no, I like that. So, like, interesting. And so we're kind of there will be a branch 21 hours from now, but she's this world we're seeing right now is a simulation she's watching. And yeah, we'll see. Or why don't you kick off the next question? Because I think that leads into this topic too.
For Lily, what is her long-term goal in play here? I mean, I know she wants revenge and to take down DEVS, but that's like me saying I'm going to take down my Google or something, because she seems very the type who would plan things out and know what's the smart play. So I'm like, what is her actual play? Because it doesn't seem that she wants to get her job back or use it to leverage to advance her career. So it's like, what is the same thing with her and Forrest, with Forrest and Amaya? It's like, what is the practical goal?
So one thing is, I think it seemed going into the last episode, a lot of her goal or what she was trying to get out of it was what happened with Sergey, right? And why they did what they did. And it seems like in her discussion with Katie, she got some of those answers, right? So I'm wondering, again, now, what is her motivating factor from her? Is it to get back at DEVS? Like, does she not think it's right what's happened, so she wants to try and shut it down?
I feel like every time a question comes up in terms of what Lily's motivations are, I go back to that scene that she had with her father, where he said that she's always thinking 3 steps ahead. And once again, I think the show is trying to tell us that we're not in tune with what Lily's true motivations are. Like, we're at least 2 or 3 steps behind of what what she's trying to accomplish or discover or do. So up to this point, it's just been like, oh, she's trying to solve the mystery of what happened to Sergei. But I think there are some other motivations that we are unclear of at this point, and I honestly don't have any guesses as to what those may be right now.
Interesting. Yeah. No, I think it's great because as much as we, especially in the last episode or our last episode of the podcast, weren't super thrilled with kind of Lily as a protagonist. I will say the scene where she was faking her psychosis was one of the best ones in the show, and that did have that angle of her being 3 steps ahead, how she tricked Kenton. So I thought that was great. And if they are able to pull something out where there's some grand scheme that Lily has, I would be excited about that and impressed.
Remind me if you remember, was there a mention of any dead family members in Lily's family?
So there's the implication, right, that her dad has died. And, as you mentioned, the scenes of her playing Go with him.
Anyway, my point is, I wonder if somehow she herself is trying to use the devs, gain access to the devs project to bring back someone in her life.
Interesting. Just play, maybe the show ends with her playing one last game of Go with her dad or something via the simulator. Interesting.
I think that's also another reason I like the theory that we're watching a Lily simulation, maybe because that could explain kind of the robotic nature of her mannerisms so far. I know a lot of people have been pointing out that there seems to be something off about the way her character is being portrayed.
Yeah.
And it could possibly be explained by the fact that this is not the real world we're watching.
Yeah, that's fair.
It might also explain why Jamie's such a puppy dog.
Your favorite line to bring up. Yep.
All right. I think we have one more question from Matt.
For devs, let's say the plan is for the devs machine finally work, and it's the real Maya, not just like a hair or two different. It's the real Maya. Let's say Forrest brings her back to life or is able to travel back in time to be with her. Let's say Forrest is finally satisfied with that. What happens next? Like, they wouldn't shut the devs program down. So it's like, do they tell the world about that? I don't think so. So I've just always thought about what everyone thinks their plan is after this, almost if they pull off this impossible task.
Yeah, I think to me the wild card in it is Katie, right? So I could see Forrest, as we talked about a little earlier, like just kind of delving into this world where he has this connection with the Maya, whether it's real, whether it's a simulation, projection, etc., and just walling himself off, and that's all he cares about. Whereas Katie, it's really hard to get a read on what she cares about. It does seem like she, kind of like Forrest, cares a lot about the kind of implications in terms of like what the actual real, like which interpretation, be it von Neumann, Copenhagen, like whatever, or at least relative to determinism. She has her Everett interpretation that she champions. So I think in one part, she really cares about the scientific aspect of this. But I also don't know what her motivation would be, because she seems to be clearly the one other than Forrest who would be able to, who would kind of have the unbridled access to this technology and could do with it whatever she wants.
Yeah, it's interesting because in this most recent episode, the majority of the focus was placed on Katie explaining what's going on with devs, right? Forrest was essentially a secondary character in this episode. So it seems to be that separate from Forrest's goals, Katie is the one really pulling the strings behind the scenes of devs now. And we really don't know what she's trying to accomplish, because I don't think she really cares whether Forrest is innocent or guilty in Amaya's death. Clearly, she has investment in the devs project for something other than that. And I guess, we have 2 episodes to find out what that is. But I think now she is the true kind of, for lack of a better term, antagonist in this show.
Yeah.
And we'll see within the next 2 episodes what her goals are.
Yep. And then I also think that Stuart and Lyndon are going to have their moment at some point, right? Like probably, somehow break into the devs facility, And I don't know, maybe they're the ones who break the main computer aspect, or mechanism, but that seems like a little too obvious and easy. But I do think that they are going to be back in the mix at some point.
I agree. Here's a crazy theory I just thought of, and I don't know if it relates to anything we've talked about so far. But going back to episode, I think it was 5, where we see Katie in the classroom and we see that she's not a fan of the von Neumann Wegener interpretation.
Yep. Yeah, you got it.
And that was the interpretation that said that in the 2-slit experiment, the presence of human consciousness modifies the behavior of the photon. So because you're observing it, it changes. So what if this series, or what if an episode ends with the fact that Forrest observing the car crash in the projection is what causes the car crash to take place?
Oh, interesting.
Right. So his evidence, or his observation of this moment in time, alters the behavior of that moment, and thus the car crash happens.
Got
and
it.
kills his wife and daughter.
Got it.
And it's just essentially, I don't know, I'm sure there's a term for it, but it essentially is just in a loop of some sort.
Yeah. No, then you kind of get into some time travel, like kind of paradoxes and stuff. But that's kind of cool. I like that. But yeah, part of that is like Katie's obviously seems to be the main one who's actually using the projection to look into the future. So, I wonder if her consciousness of seeing what's in the future can also kind of mess with what's happening, what will happen. But yeah, I'm really interested to see how things play out with Katie, with Forrest, Lily. I mean, hopefully there's some more depth that we haven't tapped into yet that gets brought to the table, like we've talked about. I think that would be great. I know you care about Jamie and what happens to him.
He has to die with the next episode. I know I said I wasn't going to be negative, but Lily's the one that spurned him, right? Yeah. So he cannot fall back into her hands that easily just because, one, her boyfriend's dead, and 2, she found out he's a Russian spy. Like, that's not a valid reason to just immediately fall back into the arms of your ex-boyfriend, especially one that you clearly had reasons you wanted to break up with in the first place.
No, that's fair. And one other thing I want to bring up in that space is I think one of the scenes, Jamie basically kind of accuses her of getting with Sergei before they actually broke up. But in that scene where they're at the Amaya campus and Sergei first starts flirting with Lily, it does seem pretty clear to me that she did in fact break up with Jamie before Sergei started, making any sort of move.
It doesn't seem like his relationship with Lily gained him any advantage in terms of what his goals were in terms of getting into the DEVS project.
Yeah. No, totally agree. Okay. Well, I think that's our last our viewer voicemail we're going to play today, right?
Yep, that was it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Matt. Great questions. Thank you to our anonymous caller from potentially Missouri, given his area code. This is great. I actually really enjoyed this. I think it was good to check back in before the next episode, giving us a little time to kind of digest the previous episode. I think the instant talk is fun too, because you get the kind of emotion of just watching a show. But I do think there's value in having time to kind of reflect. So I'm glad we did this mailbag episode. And then, we have a new episode coming up Wednesday night Pacific time. So we'll probably, I'm not sure exactly when we'll record, but we'll definitely be doing a podcast for episode 7.
Yeah. And if anyone else wants to send an email or leave a voicemail for us, here's the contact info. It's either talkingdevs@gmail.com or the voicemail line is 818-860-0421. If you call it, it goes directly to the voicemail. It's not like Scott and I will randomly just pick up and be like, hello. So give it a call if you have a question that you want us to see us discuss on this pod.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Jimmy. Appreciate it. This was fun. And thanks to our listeners and callers. Please keep those emails and calls coming. It's a lot of fun to hear you guys and your enthusiasm for the show. And we will catch you next week.